Hey everyone, this is Neo once again from the Overclocker magazine, and today I'm here to talk to you about the GIGABYTE Z690 AORUS Master. So this motherboard retails for about $469 on Newegg, and locally at Progenics you can get this board for about $10,400 or maybe $10,300, I'm not sure. For this price, I think this motherboard is the cheapest out of its competitors, and its direct competitors are boards like the ASRock Z690 Taichi, the ROG Maximus Z690 Hero. But compared to those motherboards, this one is actually significantly cheaper, and that's one of the key selling points of this motherboard. And for that cheaper price, you don't necessarily get an inferior motherboard. In fact, you get a motherboard that's equally good, and in many respects, or at least in some respects, even better than the other motherboards that cost more than this one does. For instance, you are still getting 19 phases just for the V-core alone, and each of those power stages is 105 amps. Again, 105 amps times 19 is not how you're going to get to maximum current draw, and it's not even relevant. However, even at 50%, you're still going to get more than what you would ever need for any sort of extreme overclocking. Power is more than sorted for this motherboard and for this platform, so this is not anything that you have to worry about. One of the key standout features for this board, if probably the only standout feature for this board, is the 10 gigabit Ethernet. Not many of us have 10 gigabit Ethernet, but those who do would definitely appreciate that sort of connectivity, speed, and method. But for me, what actually made this motherboard stand out from its competitors is the inclusion of 5 M.2 sockets for your storage and so forth. So more than just price, the 5 M.2 sockets and the 10 gigabit LAN, it's just the aesthetic element. I think this is easily the best looking gigabyte board I've ever come across. I understand that you have the vision boards and so forth, but when you talk about subtlety, when you talk about something done with taste and done with a sort of sensitivity that is foreign in my experience with a lot of motherboards, and it was one of the first boards that I actually saw for Z690, and I was literally just blown away, like, wow, this is probably GIGABYTE's best looking board, and right now I'm pretty much convinced that it is GIGABYTE's best looking board. And if you want to add to that excitement of the aesthetic element of the board, you have your ARGB headers, you have the regular RGB headers, you have all sorts of things that you can use. The unfortunate bit about that is that you're going to have to use RGB fusion, and I know how many of us feel about RGB fusion. I'm one of those people. I'm like, no. But if there is another way for you to use some other software to control the lighting and so forth, then definitely this board allows you to do that to enhance any visual splendor that you may have found on this motherboard. But more than the aesthetics and the features and so forth, I'd like to tell you about just my experience using this motherboard. So let's go just from the BIOS. GIGABYTE BIOS is slow to progress. It's much improved over what it's been for a long time. We don't have mouse problems and things like that. And in many ways, I appreciate some of the features that GIGABYTE has on their BIOS that you don't find with other vendors. One of those features being the ability to set up your own menu quickly and intuitively. You just hit the insert key, and that particular option goes into your favorites, and you can remove it equally doing exactly the same thing. So what I normally do is just set up my own menu with all the options that I want for memory overclocking, for the individual core overclocking, voltage frequency curves, and all of that stuff. Put it in my favorites menu, and I never have to deal with the other menus at all. Now, going further, talking about the BIOS, I've also seen another feature that I haven't seen on any other vendor board thus far. I am not saying it's not there, but I have not found it readily accessible or as accessible as it is on the GIGABYTE board. And that's the ability to turn off individual cores. So you can turn off core 1, core 2, keep core 3 on, turn off core 4, keep core 6 on, and that sort of thing. It's not necessarily useful in how you use your system, but it is useful in you trying to figure out which is the worst performing core or the best performing core. So on this board, you don't necessarily get a star next to the best performing core. Outside of reading what is the maximum fused ratio of each of these cores. Now, the ability to turn off individual cores allows me to do something that I've always wanted to be able to do, and that is figure out which is not only the best performing core, but more importantly, the worst performing core. Because if I can find out which is the worst performing core and eliminate that, then I know that my worst case scenario or my all-core OC is going to be limited by the worst performing core, or rather the worst overclocking core. And that may be core number 5, for instance. And if that one can only do 4.9, then I know that my all-core frequency is going to be 4.9, because that's the one that's the weakest, right? With this motherboard, I was able to figure that out pretty quickly, more so than I was able to on the previous boards. So with that said as well, there are some features that don't necessarily work the way you think they would. There's a CPU upgrade option that Gigabyte has, so it allows you, as before, you can get 3 bins more on top of the normal turbo frequency, I think. So that's called the max profile. So there's 3 bins more, and the gamer's profile is one bin more. The crazy thing is that when I picked the gamer profile, I lost my E-cores on the 12600K. So it went from being a 10-core CPU to just a normal 6-core CPU. For some reason, the E-cores went away. And I was like, but why is that happening? And then I thought as well, could it be because for gaming, ideally, you want all the E-cores off? And if that is the case and it was designed that way, then it should be articulated as such in the description. But it isn't. All it tells you is that you get 1 ratio more for the gamer profile and 3 ratios more for the max profile. So those are the little things that I wish Gigabyte would fix in their BIOSes, and it actually translates into the software aspect of dealing with a Gigabyte motherboard. When it comes to just the hardware, component selection, build quality, aesthetic element, and just the heft and well-roundedness of the Gigabyte products, I think they're second to none. When it comes to the software, that's not an equal offering. So basically, if the hardware brought its A game, the software is bringing like the D team or something. And that mismatch overall ends up harming the Gigabyte experience. And that shouldn't be the case, because the hardware is there. The hardware is perfect. It's just the software parts where it just doesn't necessarily come together. For instance, if you have an overclock that fails and the system crashes and you hit reset, the system will reset, but you will not get a post at all. You actually have to power cycle the motherboard for it to come back up again. So just know that if your system crashes, particularly with clock watchdog timer, which is CPU overclock related more times than not, if that fails and you hit reset and nothing happens, just remember to power cycle the board. Then you'll be able to get into BIOS and you'll see the post code and so forth. So it's the little things like that. And fortunately, those things can be fixed with software. So in closing, what do I think of this motherboard? I think electrically, component selection wise and so forth, right? With the audio amp, a DAC, the choice of codec, there's the audio solution is brilliant as always. You get a lot of stuff with this motherboard electrically, right? 2 USB 3.0 headers. I think you also get another one for USB 3.2 Gen 2 X2 as well. On top of it, you get 11 USB ports on the rear I/O. You also get an additional USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C. If you take in the price that this board is selling at, the $10,400 or so, or $469, you take in the build quality, you take in the aesthetic element, and you take in all the little features that they have in the BIOS that actually help you, right? Like the ability to turn off cores on and off and things like that. And obviously you get the memory profiles as well, depending on the IC that you have, Micron, Hynix, Samsung, and the density, of course, of the DIMMs. I think you have a very solid offering here, and again, for the price, it's gonna be very hard for you to beat this motherboard. It will be up to you to decide, do you pay more for the competing boards and get a slightly better or perhaps marginally better software experience, or do you go with the Gigabyte board and hope that in future they keep improving the software, which I have no doubt they will do. But anyway, let me know what you guys think of the Gigabyte Z690 AORUS Master. Leave your comments below and remember to share, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. So take care and peace.